I wasn't supposed to touch her, but if I hadn't, she would have died. The first thing I remember is the sound. Not a scream, not even a crash, just a soft, unnatural thud against polished marble, like something expensive being dropped and no one daring to react. I froze at the bottom of the staircase, my hands still damp from dishwater, my heart stuttering in my chest as I looked up and saw her. Mrs. Knight, lying there, too still, too quiet. For a second, just one, I told myself it wasn't my place. I was the maid, the invisible one, the girl who cleaned fingerprints off glass and kept her head down when powerful people walked by. Girls like me didn't run toward problems in houses like this. We stayed quiet. We stayed out of the way. But something about the way her hand twitched, barely noticeable, like she was reaching for something that wasn't there. That broke me. My feet moved before my thoughts caught up. I dropped the towel, slipped on the last step, caught myself on the railing. Ma'am, my voice came out smaller than I wanted. I knelt beside her, my knees pressing into cold marble, my breath quick and shallow. Up close, she looked fragile, not like the woman who commanded rooms with a single glance. Her skin felt cool under my fingers. Too cool. Stay with me, I whispered, even though I didn't know if she could hear me. I didn't think. I just acted. The way my mom taught me back when emergencies were just part of surviving. Check breathing. Check pulse. Don't panic. My hands trembled anyway. The mansion was too quiet. No footsteps. No guards. No one coming to help. Just me. Just her. And the kind of silence that felt like it was watching. Come on. Please. I pressed my hand gently over hers, grounding myself more than her. Seconds stretched, each one heavier than the last. Then, barely a breath. Shallow, uneven, but there. Relief hit me so hard I almost laughed. Almost cried. Okay, I've got you. I reached for the emergency phone on the wall, nearly missing it with shaking fingers. My reflection flashed in the polished surface beside it. Uniform wrinkled, hair falling loose, eyes wide like I didn't belong in this moment. Maybe I didn't, but I stayed. I stayed while the seconds dragged. I stayed while the silence pressed in. I stayed because walking away would have been easier, and I couldn't live with that. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard a door open. Heavy footsteps. Measured. Controlled. The kind of presence you don't need to see to feel. I didn't turn. Not yet. I just held her hand tighter, my voice steady for the first time. You're going to be okay. And for a brief second, I believed it. Then the air changed, and I knew he was here. I felt him before I saw him. The air shifted, heavy and controlled, like the entire house had taken a breath and refused to let it go. Footsteps echoed across the marble behind me, slow, deliberate, each one landing with quiet authority that made my spine straighten without permission. I swallowed, my fingers still wrapped around Mrs. Knight's hand, and told myself not to look. Not yet. Because the moment I did, everything would change. Who touched her? His voice was low, not loud, not rushed, but it cut through the room like it belonged there more than anyone else. I closed my eyes for half a second, steadying my breath, then turned. He stood at the base of the staircase, dressed in a dark suit that looked untouched by the world outside, like nothing ever reached him unless he allowed it. Tall, still, watching. His eyes found mine instantly, not searching. Not questioning, finding, like he already knew I was the answer. I pushed myself up slowly, my knees protesting against the cold floor, my hands lifting just slightly like I needed to show I meant no harm. She collapsed. I said, my voice quieter than I wanted but steady enough. I checked her breathing. It is weak, but it is there. I called for help. He did not move. Not a single step. But something in his gaze sharpened, like he was measuring every word, every breath I took. Two men appeared behind him without a sound, dressed just as sharply, their presence firm but silent. Security, or something more. You were alone with her. It was not a question. I nodded once. Yes. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I became suddenly aware of everything about myself. The damp sleeves of my uniform. The faint smell of soap still clinging to my skin. The fact that I was standing in the center of a world that was never meant to include someone like me. Why? The word landed heavier than anything else he had said. I blinked. Because she needed help. His jaw tightened, just slightly, like the answer did not satisfy him. Or maybe it surprised him. I could not tell. Anyone else would have waited, he said. For staff. For permission. I held his gaze, even though every instinct told me to look away. Anyone else might have been too late. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, gone before I could name it. Then he stepped forward. Just one step. But it felt like the entire room shifted with him. I did not move. I could not. He stopped close enough that I could see the fine details of his expression now. The control. The calculation. The kind of calm that did not come from peace, but from power. His gaze dropped briefly to my hands, still faintly trembling, then back to my face. "What is your name?" "Emily," I said. "Emily Carter." He repeated it quietly, like testing the weight of it. "Emily." The sound of my name in his voice did something strange to my chest. Not fear. Not exactly. Something heavier. More permanent. In the distance, I heard the faint echo of approaching sirens, growing closer. Help was coming. Normal people. Normal rules. But somehow, standing there under his gaze, I had the unsettling feeling that nothing about this moment was normal anymore. He glanced past me at his mother, still lying on the marble, then back at me. And when he spoke again, his voice was softer. More dangerous for it. "You stayed." I nodded, barely breathing now. "Yes." Another pause. Then, quietly, like a decision had already been made long before I understood the question, he said, "That changes things." The sirens grew louder, cutting through the silence like a reminder that the outside world still existed, that there were rules beyond this house, beyond him, but he did not move to meet them, did not even turn his head, and somehow that made the sound feel distant, unimportant, like it did not belong here, not in a place where everything seemed to bend around his presence. I stepped back slightly, giving space as the front doors opened somewhere behind him. Hurried footsteps and urgent voices spilling into the hall, paramedics moving quickly, but carefully, their equipment clattering softly against the polished floors as they approached, and for the first time since it happened, I let go of Mrs. Knight's hand, my fingers lingering for a second longer than necessary before pulling away completely. "We have her," one of them said, already kneeling, already working, their calm efficiency filling the space I had been holding together with nothing but instinct and fear. I should have felt relief. I told myself I did. But my chest still felt tight, like something had not finished unfolding yet. I took another step back, then another, trying to fade into the background the way I always did, the way I was supposed to, just another employee who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But his eyes did not leave me. Not once. Even as the paramedics lifted his mother carefully onto the stretcher, even as instructions were exchanged and movements became faster, more urgent, his attention stayed fixed, steady, unshaken. Watching me, measuring something I could not see. I turned slightly, intending to step out of the way completely, to disappear into the hallway before anyone could ask more questions, before I became something more than invisible, but his voice stopped me before I made it 2 steps. "Stay." Just one word. Quiet. Controlled. But it landed like a command my body understood before my mind did. I froze. My back straightened slowly, my hands curling slightly at my sides as I turned back toward him, my heart beginning to beat faster again for a completely different reason. "They will ask questions," he continued, his tone even, as if he was explaining something simple, something obvious. "You will answer them." I nodded once, because that made sense, because that was normal, because that was what anyone would expect. But then he took another step closer, closing the distance just enough to make everything feel sharper, more focused, like the air itself had narrowed between us. "And after that," he said, his voice lowering just slightly, "you do not leave." My breath caught before I could stop it. "I work here," I said carefully, the words coming out slower now, more cautious, because something in the way he spoke made it clear this was no longer about a job, no longer about schedules or instructions written on paper. "Then you understand," he replied. His gaze dropped briefly to the faint marks on my knees from the marble floor, then back to my eyes, unwavering. "This is no longer just work." The paramedics began moving past us, guiding the stretcher toward the exit, their presence breaking the moment just enough for me to breathe again, but not enough to escape it. I watched as they disappeared down the hallway, the sound of wheels against polished stone fading with them, and for a second I thought maybe that was it. Maybe everything would return to normal once they were gone. But when I looked back at him, I knew it would not, because he was still there, still watching, And whatever decision he had made the moment he stepped into that room, it had not changed. It had only begun. I should have left. That was the thought that kept repeating in my head as the house slowly returned to its unnatural silence, as if nothing had happened at all, as if a woman had not just been carried out on a stretcher while her son watched without flinching. The front doors closed. The echoes faded. And suddenly, it was just us again. Him and me, standing in a space that no longer felt like a workplace, but something else entirely. I shifted my weight slightly, my fingers brushing against the fabric of my uniform, as if that alone could remind me who I was supposed to be here. Just the maid. Just Emily. Invisible. Replaceable. Temporary. You were thinking about leaving. His voice cut through my thoughts so cleanly, it almost felt like he had reached inside my head and pulled the words out himself. I looked up at him, startled despite myself. The word caught in my throat. Because denying it would be a lie. And somehow, I had the feeling he did not tolerate those. His gaze did not soften, but it did narrow slightly, like he was studying the space between what I said and what I meant. You already decided, he continued, calm, certain. You think this is over. I swallowed, forcing my voice to steady. I did what anyone would do. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew they were wrong. Not because they were untrue, but because they did not belong in his world. His lips pressed together for a fraction of a second, not quite. A smile, not quite disapproval. Something in between. No, he said quietly. You did what most people would avoid. The weight of that settled between us, heavier than anything before it. I had not thought about it that way. I had not wanted to. Because if I did, it meant this was not just a moment. Not just a coincidence. It meant it mattered. And if it mattered, then I was no longer invisible. I felt it then. That shift. Subtle, but irreversible. He stepped closer again, slow enough that I could have stepped back if I wanted to. But I did not. I stayed where I was. Even as my heartbeat picked up, even as every instinct told me I was standing too close to something I did not understand. Emily Carter, he said, my name steady on his tongue now, familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. Do you know what happens to people who see too much in my house? It was not a threat, not spoken like one, but it did not need to be. I shook my head barely. No, they become part of it. The words were simple, final. I felt my breath hitch again, my mind racing for something to say, something to ground this moment back into something normal, something I could control. I did not see anything, I said quickly. I was just, you were there. He interrupted gently, but firmly. And that is enough. Silence followed, stretching long enough for me to feel every second of it. I glanced toward the hallway, toward the door that led back to the staff quarters, to the small room that had always felt temporary but safe in its own quiet way. It felt farther now, like a place that no longer belonged to me. When I looked back at him, he was already watching me again, waiting, not for my answer, for my understanding. What does that mean? I asked, my voice softer now, more careful. He did not hesitate. It means, he said, his tone lowering just slightly, you do not walk out of this house like nothing changed. My fingers curled slightly at my sides, my pulse loud in my ears. And if I try, this time, something did change in his expression. Not anger, not even warning, just certainty, absolute and unshakable. You will not. And for the first time since I had met him, I realized something that settled deep in my chest, heavier than fear. He was not asking me to stay. He had already decided that I would. I did not answer him right away, not because I did not understand, but because I understood too well. The kind of certainty in his voice did not leave space for arguments, only for consequences, and I was starting to realize that everything in this house came with those. I took a slow breath, steadying myself the way I had just minutes ago on the marble floor, except this time there was no emergency to react to, no clear right or wrong. Just a line I could not see, but knew I was standing on. I have a life outside this house, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm, holding onto that truth like it could anchor me. I have shifts, bills, responsibilities. I cannot just... I stopped, because even as I said it, the words sounded smaller in this space, like they belonged to a different world entirely. His expression did not change, but his gaze shifted slightly, not away from me, just deeper, like he was listening to something underneath what I said. You think those things define your limits, he said calmly. They do not. My fingers tightened at my sides. They do to me. That, at least, felt real. Mine. He studied me for a moment longer, then nodded once, slow, deliberate, as if acknowledging something he found interesting. Not challenging, not difficult, just something to consider. Good, he said. Then you understand what you are risking. The word lingered. Risk. It pulled my thoughts back to the staircase, to the cold floor beneath my knees, to the moment I chose not to walk away. I had not thought of it as risk then. I had thought of it as the only choice I could live with. But now it felt different. He took another step past me, moving toward the staircase where everything had started, his attention briefly shifting to the empty space where his mother had been, then back to me without hesitation. You risked your life for someone you did not know, he continued, his voice quieter now, but somehow heavier. Most people would not do that. I shook my head slightly. I did not think about it. Like that. Exactly. That single word carried more weight than anything else he had said. He turned fully toward me again, closing the space between us once more, but this time it felt less like pressure and more like gravity, like something pulling me in whether I wanted it or not. People who act without calculation are rare, he said, and rare things are not left unprotected. The words settled into me slowly. Protected, not owned, not controlled, but it did not feel simple. Not in his voice, not in this place. I do not need protection, I said, even though part of me was not entirely sure that was true anymore. He did not argue, did not dismiss it. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying me again, as if measuring not just what I said, but what I believed. That is not for you to decide anymore. My breath caught, sharper this time. You cannot just decide that for me. I already did. There it was again. Not arrogance, not emotion, just fact. I took a step back without meaning to, creating space that immediately felt too thin, too fragile to matter. Why? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Why does any of this matter to you? For the first time since he walked into the room, there was a pause. Not long, not obvious, but real. His gaze shifted briefly, not away, but inward, like he was choosing his answer carefully. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, quieter than before, but no less certain. Because you were the only one who did not hesitate. The words landed somewhere deeper than I expected. Not as a threat, not as a command, but as something that felt permanent. He stepped back then, just enough to break the intensity of the moment, but not enough to release it entirely. You will stay in the East Wing tonight, he said, his tone returning to that calm authority that left no room for argument. Someone will bring you what you need. I blinked, caught between confusion and something else I could not quite name. And tomorrow, he added, his gaze locking onto mine one last time, we will decide what happens next. And somehow, I knew that whatever that decision was, it would not be mine. The East Wing felt like a different world. Quieter, colder, not in temperature, but in presence, like every sound was absorbed before it had a chance to exist. I stood just inside the doorway after the staff member left, the soft click of the door echoing longer than it should have, my fingers still resting against the handle as if I could open it again and walk back into something familiar. But there was nothing familiar left. Not tonight. The room itself was larger than my entire apartment, the kind of space I had only ever seen in magazines or from a distance while cleaning rooms I was never meant to belong in. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched along one wall, the city lights beyond them glowing faintly, distant and unreachable, like a reminder that the world I knew was still out there, just not within reach. I stepped further inside slowly, my shoes barely making a sound against the polished wood floor, my reflection following me in the glass, as if I needed proof that I was still myself. Still Emily. Still the girl who counted hours and tips and grocery bills. Except none of that seemed to matter here. A neatly folded set of clothes rested on the bed. Not a uniform. Not anything I owned. Soft fabric. Neutral colors. Chosen. Prepared. Like someone had already decided I would need them before I even arrived. I hesitated before touching them, my fingers brushing lightly against the material, unsure if accepting them meant something I was not ready to admit. This is not mine. The thought came quickly, but neither was this room. Neither was anything about tonight. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders lowering just slightly as exhaustion began to settle in, the kind that does not come from physical work, but from everything else. From decisions. from moments that change things you cannot undo. I sat on the edge of the bed carefully, as if I was afraid it might disappear if I moved too fast, my hands resting in my lap as I stared at the floor. It had only been a few hours. That was all. A few hours since I was in the kitchen, finishing dishes, thinking about my next shift, my next paycheck, the next normal day. And now I was here, in a room that was not mine, in a situation I did not choose, under the attention of a man who did not ask. A soft knock broke through my thoughts, light but deliberate. I looked up immediately, my pulse picking up again as I stood, crossing the room with careful steps before opening the door, just enough to see who it was. A woman stood there, older, composed, dressed in the same quiet elegance that seemed to define this house. She offered a small, polite nod. "Mr. Knight asked me to make sure you have everything you need." Her voice was calm, neutral, practiced. I hesitated for half a second before nodding back. "I am fine." The words felt automatic, like something I had said 100 times before, even when it was not entirely true. Her eyes lingered on me for a moment, not unkind, but observant, like she understood more than she said. "If you need anything," she added softly, "you only have to ask." I almost smiled at that. Almost. Because something told me asking was not really part of how things worked here. "Thank you," I said instead. She inclined her head once more, then stepped away, leaving me alone again with the silence and the weight of everything that had not yet been said. I closed the door gently, leaning back against it for a moment, my eyes drifting toward the window where the city lights flickered in the distance. Somewhere out there, my life was still waiting for me, unchanged, untouched. But as I stood there, in a room that did not belong to me, wearing a night that no longer felt like my own, I realized something I could not ignore. When morning came, I might not be able to go back to it. I did not sleep. Not really. I lay on the edge of the bed, fully dressed in clothes that were not mine, staring at the ceiling as the hours stretched and folded into each other, the faint glow of the city slipping through the curtains like a reminder that time was still moving even if I felt stuck between two versions of my life. Every sound made me aware of where I was. The quiet hum of the building, the distant echo of footsteps that never came close enough to reach me, the silence in between, heavier than anything else. I closed my eyes at some point, but my mind did not follow. It stayed awake, replaying everything. The staircase, his voice, the way he said my name like it already belonged in his world. When morning finally came, it did not feel like relief. It felt like a deadline. Soft light filtered into the room, pale and controlled, illuminating the space in a way that made everything look even more unreal. I sat up slowly, my body stiff, my thoughts already racing ahead of me. "Today," he had said. "Today we decide." The words lingered in my head as I stood, moving toward the window almost without thinking. The city looked different from here. Cleaner, distant, like something I could see but not reach. I pressed my hand lightly against the glass, grounding myself in something real, something solid. "You can leave." The thought came quietly this time. Not rushed, not panicked, just possible. The door was there, the hallway beyond it, the exit somewhere past that. No one had locked me in. No one had physically stopped me. Not yet. I turned from the window, my heart beginning to beat faster, not from fear this time, but from something sharper. Decision. I moved quickly, before I could overthink it, crossing the room and reaching for the door handle. My fingers wrapped around it. Cool. Smooth. Real. I paused, just for a second. Then I opened it. The hallway outside was empty. Quiet. Just like everything else in this house. No guards. No staff in sight. Nothing blocking my way. I stepped out slowly, my footsteps soft against the floor as I looked left, then right, mapping the path in my head the way I always did in unfamiliar places. Find the stairs. Find the exit. Do not draw attention. Just walk. I started moving, my pace steady, controlled, each step carrying me further from the room, from the version of myself that had stayed, from the decision I had not agreed to. "This is still your choice." I repeated it in my mind, holding on to it tightly, like it might disappear if I did not. I reached the end of the hallway, turned the corner, and stopped. He was there, standing near the base of the staircase, exactly where everything had begun, dressed the same, composed the same, as if he had been there the entire time waiting for this exact moment. Waiting for me. My breath caught before I could stop it, my body going. still as his gaze lifted and found mine immediately. No surprise, no confusion, just quiet recognition. "Good morning, Emily." His voice was calm. Expected. Like this was part of a conversation that had already started before I understood it. I tightened my grip on the strap of my bag, grounding myself as I forced my voice to remain steady. "I am leaving." The words sounded smaller out loud than they had in my head, but they were still mine. Still true. He did not move, did not step forward. But something in his expression shifted, not in opposition, not in challenge, but in confirmation. "No," he said quietly. "You are not." The certainty in his voice hit harder this time, because now I knew it was not a warning. It was a fact he had already accepted. I swallowed, taking one small step forward despite myself, refusing to retreat even as the space between us felt heavier with every second. "You do not get to decide that," I said, my voice sharper now, more certain than I felt. For a moment, silence held. Then, slowly, he tilted his head, studying me the way he had before, like I was something rare, something unpredictable, something that did not follow the rules he was used to. "I already did," he repeated. And this time, standing there in the daylight, with the exit somewhere behind him and my freedom suddenly feeling farther than it ever had, I realized something I could not ignore. Leaving was never going to be as simple as opening a door. I held his gaze even as my pulse climbed, even as every instinct inside me warned that pushing back against someone like him came with consequences I could not see yet. But I did it anyway, because if I gave in now, even a little, I knew I would not get that choice back. "You cannot keep me here," I said, slower this time, choosing each word carefully, grounding myself in something solid. "That is not how this works." For a moment, nothing changed. He did not step closer, did not raise his voice, but the space between us felt tighter, like the air itself had shifted to listen. "You believe this is about force," he said quietly. "It is not." I frowned slightly, confusion cutting through my frustration. "Then what is it about?" His eyes did not leave mine, not even for a second. "Reality." The word landed heavier than I expected. I opened my mouth to respond, but he continued before I could. "You think you can walk out, return to your life, and nothing follows you," he said, his tone still calm, still controlled, but carrying something deeper now, something that felt closer to truth than threat. "But you cannot unknow what you saw. You cannot step outside this house and pretend you were never part of this moment." I shook my head, my grip tightening on my bag. "I did not see anything." "I told you that." "You were there," he repeated, his voice lowering just slightly. "And that is enough." Silence stretched again, but this time it did not feel empty. It felt like something building beneath the surface, something I was only just beginning to understand. He took a step toward me, not closing the distance completely, just enough to shift the balance again, to remind me, without saying it, that this was still his space, his world. "There are people who will ask questions," he continued. "Not here. Not from me. From others who will not care why you were there. Only that you were." My breath slowed, not from calm, but from focus. "Then I will tell them the truth. That you are a maid who happened to be in the right place at the right time," he said. It was not mocking. It was not dismissive. It was realistic. "And they will believe you." I hesitated, because for the first time, I was not sure they would. He watched that hesitation, saw it, understood it before I even fully processed it myself. "You see," he said softly, "this is not about what you choose. It is about what follows you after." The words settled deeper than anything else he had said. Not a command, not a threat, a consequence. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders lowering just slightly as I looked past him for a second, toward the staircase, toward the door somewhere beyond it, the exit that had felt so close just moments ago. It did not feel close anymore. It felt complicated. When I looked back at him, something in my expression must have changed, because his gaze shifted too, not softer, not warmer, but more certain, like he knew I had crossed something I could not step back over. "What do you want from me?" I asked finally, my voice quieter now, not defeated, but no longer pushing blindly against something I did not understand. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied me again, the same way he had from the beginning, like he was seeing something unfold in real time. Then, slowly, he stepped aside, just enough to clear the path behind him. Not an invitation. Not exactly. But not a barrier either. "Come with me," he said. Simple. Direct. I did not move right away. My eyes flickered to the open space beside him, to the hallway that led deeper into his world instead of out of it. The choice was still there, technically, but it did not feel like a choice anymore. Not the way it had before. I tightened my grip on my bag one last time, then stepped forward, past him, into whatever came next. And as I did, I felt it. That shift. Quiet. Final. The moment I stopped trying to leave and started stepping into his world instead. I did not look back. Not when I passed him. Not when I felt his presence shift behind me. Turning, following, closing the distance without ever needing to rush. The hallway stretched ahead, longer than it had before, or maybe it just felt that way now that I knew I was not walking through it as the maid anymore. Each step echoed differently. Heavier. More deliberate. Like the house itself had started to notice me. I kept my pace steady, even as my thoughts caught up all at once, questions pressing in from every direction, none of them simple enough to answer. What happens now? What does staying really mean? What have I stepped into? You are thinking too far ahead. His voice came from just behind me, close enough that I did not need to turn to know he was there. I exhaled quietly, forcing my shoulders to stay relaxed. I do not have much of a choice. Everyone has a choice, he replied. Some just understand the outcome sooner. I slowed slightly, just enough to acknowledge the words, then continued forward. The corridor opened into a wider space, sunlight spilling across polished floors, illuminating a part of the house I had never been allowed to enter before. It was quieter here, not empty, controlled, designed, like every detail existed. For a reason I was not meant to question. Until now. He moved past me then, not rushing, simply stepping ahead with the kind of ease that made it clear this was his world in every sense. I followed without being told to, the distance between us small but deliberate, like I was being guided without feeling led. We stopped in front of a set of double doors. He pushed them open without hesitation. Inside, the room was different from the rest of the house. Less polished, more personal. Bookshelves lined the walls. A large desk faced the windows. No clutter, no excess, just control. He stepped inside first, then turned slightly, watching as I crossed the threshold. That pause mattered. I felt it. The moment my foot passed the doorway. The invisible line I had just crossed again. This is where decisions are made, he said, his voice calm, but carrying something deeper now. Not authority. Not just that. Ownership. I glanced around the room, taking it in, trying to understand what he meant, what he was about to say, what role I had just stepped into without fully agreeing to it. And what decision are you making about me? I asked, my voice steady, even as my pulse picked up again. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked past me, moving toward the desk, his hand resting lightly against the surface as he looked out the window for a brief second before turning back. When his eyes found mine again, there was no hesitation left in them. No calculation. Just certainty. I am not deciding what to do with you, he said. The words caught me off guard. I am deciding what you become. The shift in meaning hit harder than I expected. I felt my breath slow, my thoughts narrowing as I focused on him, on the weight behind that statement. And what is that supposed to mean? He stepped closer, not invading, not forcing, but close enough that I could not ignore him even if I tried. It means, he said quietly, you are no longer someone who passes through